Okay, for some background, my mother, who is Latina, married my stepdad when I was a kid. He's European and quite successful, but strict about it. My parents taught my siblings and I the value of money and also not to forget our culture. So we were never spoiled and work if we wanted anything. So on to the story. Because of the information above, I'm 28 female, currently living in Europe with my boyfriend, 32 male, of 3 years. And last year, before everything went down, we traveled with my parents to my home country, and everything went amazing. It was the first ever I'm bringing my boyfriend to meet my family, so everyone were very welcoming, except one cousin and entitled aunt. But also, they thought he might be the one. Every time they asked me about marriage, my answer was always the same, that we are not in a rush or marriage is not our first priority. Eventually, they stopped asking. Last week, my entitled aunt called me, and before I even said hello, she started to yell at me that I should be ashamed of myself, and she is going to pray for my soul, since I'm so evil, and I better give the money from my wedding to my cousin. I was shocked and confused, since I couldn't understand what she is talking about. And before I knew it, she hung up on me. After that, got messages from my entire family that I shouldn't get married, I'm ducking disgusting, and I'm ungrateful, and if I want to make it right, not only do I have to give the money for wedding, but also any savings that I have, since I don't need it because I should know that in our culture, we should provide to the young ones, and if we want to be part of our culture, I should give in. It didn't matter how many times my parents, my siblings, or I told them that there is no wedding and that I'm not even engaged. We told them that they know how my entitled aunt is, and that they should know better and not believing her, but somehow they didn't budge. So I either give my money or I'll be cut from my family, which I would not do, since it is my hard work money, and again, there is no wedding. Edit. I forgot to mention, in my culture, when we say older need to provide for the young ones, we meant children, not a 24-year-old woman. Sorry if anyone got confused. Hold up. Your aunt wants you to give the money that you are spending on a non-existing wedding to your cousin? Because your culture says that you have to provide for the young ones. That's insane, and even more insane that your relatives, despite being told by your family that you are not engaged, still insist that you should give your wedding money to your cousin. Wow. I hate to say this, but if your family is so stupid that they believe that your aunt is correct and you are lying, and your only hope is to give them most of your money, trust me, you are much better off if you cut contact with your family. You should send them one last blast email from both of you to say this. 1. There is no wedding planned. 2. Aunt is an idiot who just wants to get her greedy hands on some money. And 3. You want nothing to do with any of them until and unless they apologize, except for aunt. You want no contact with her ever again. Even an apology does not excuse her greed and entitlement. If they respond badly to this, then really all you mean to them is a piggy bank. Chapter 1. The Beginning. So it was 2012 when my stepbrother married this chick. Let me tell you, she was the most entitled person ever. My brother wasn't rich or even a nice guy, but she somehow decided he was perfect for her. I always didn't like this chick because she was always going around and thinking she was better than everyone and just overall being snobby. I was outcasted from the family because of it, because she was a good person. I saw through her BS. Anyways, they get married and have a kid, my niece. They get this big house and everything. Ever since my niece was born, we had her every weekend. And if my mom had plans, then we were expected to work around their schedule to get her, or figure it out. We thought this was weird because most mothers would want to have their babies around them. My mom wouldn't let me out of her sight until I was 2. But the first house she came home to was ours. We shrugged it off and just loved continuing to have her. The sister-in-law also had a son from a previous marriage. We would sometimes get him too, but he was out of control. I believe he has some sort of ADD and psychopathic tendencies. I would try to teach him that animals needed to be treated with respect, and he always made sure to help me with my own whenever he was over. I had a hamster and a cat. But his own dog was treated badly regularly by him, despite mine and my mom's guidance. He also tried to commit S during 2nd grade because he was tired of his mom punishing him for stuff most children would get in trouble for. We figured this was just him and encouraged his mother to get him help, but she refused and said he was normal and just a boy. When my niece started acting the same way, we both knew it was just the bad parenting. We tried everything we could to give them at least stability on the weekend. They were always going from house to house because relatives wanted to see them. But it wasn't enough in the end, sadly. Chapter 2: The Divorce. So, my brother's terrible personality finally sent her over the edge. She was tired of living paycheck to paycheck and thought she deserved not to work, or at least have a stay-at-home job. So, because the house deed was only in her name, she ended up getting the house. After many debates, she ended up getting full custody and all the items in the house as well. My brother had to live on our couch because of this. During the divorce process, my brother worked as a corrections officer in a prison. And guess who decides to date an inmate? Yup, sister-in-law. Apparently, this inmate was a friend of the family and ran some kind of mafia gang. Well, because the divorce wasn't final, my brother lost his job because it was a conflict of interest and he hadn't made it out of the probation period. It literally broke his heart to lose his dream job he finally found. So here we are, my brother living back at home with us, jobless, nowhere to go, and we still were getting my niece every weekend, or more. We found out that she was taking my niece and her son to see this guy in prison because they have a right to a father figure. Of course, we were outraged, but there was nothing we could do. Fast forward, and sister-in-law dumps the leader of the gang and decides to date one of his lackeys instead because he was actually out of prison. We'll call him Carl for the sake of the story. Chapter 3: The House. So eventually, my brother gets his crap together and finds a new chick to bum off of. She lives like 3 states away, so he decides to go live there, away from my niece, his child. He still has partial custody over my niece at this point, so he low-key abandoned her with us whenever it was her week to be with him. He told us he would just come up every week to spend time with her, or whatever, but he literally only did this a handful of times. This poor kid never had a chance, honestly. So my mom ends up being the middleman between these people, and all she really just wants to do is just be there for my niece. So fast forward, and sister-in-law tells us that they're moving because they can't afford the house they were living in, but it's okay cause Carl found a house for sale and they were buying that one for really cheap. My mom looked into the house and couldn't figure out how they were getting it for half the price of what the listing said it was for, but she just shrugged it off because sister-in-law could be very manipulative, and she did know more about mortgages and stuff than my mom because she worked at a bank. So they move and we think it's okay. Boy, were we wrong. My mom visits this house and there was literal fences all over this house. She told me the smell was awful and that it looked like it had been through many squatters. She told me that all the doors locked from the outside and that there was a bed in the attic with someone's name written above it. She also said that none of the electrical, plumbing worked either. So literally, this house was not suited for anyone, let alone children, who were about 8 and 6 at the time. She told my brother, and he basically said there was nothing he could do. So she thinks there's nothing she could do either. It also didn't help that sister-in-law couldn't keep her story straight. She told my mom that the house was a part of Carl's family, and they inherited it, making us feel like this was sketchy. My mom would pick my niece up from this house every weekend and would get little glimpses of what was actually happening through her conversations with her. Like, apparently, they didn't have electric or water because they didn't have proof of residency. My mom asked sister-in-law why they can't show the deed, and she told her that they didn't know where it was and made all these excuses on why they couldn't show proof. So they were using a propane tank to warm the house, and Carl would rig the electric on at night so they could have it illegally. We didn't know this though at the time. They also just let my niece run around the town, which put her in many scary situations, she said. Like men watching her and getting asked a lot of questions from people. Take note, she's about 6 at the time. There is more, but I'll keep it at that to save time. So Carl gets pulled over one day, and the cops run his license. He apparently had a warrant out for his arrest, so Carl makes a break for it, since he was only a couple blocks away from the house. The cops obviously follow and knock on the door, and apparently, sister-in-law opens the door after telling Carl to run out the back and that she would hold them off. She tackles a cop, and obviously this plan didn't work because at this point, the officers already had backup and both were arrested. Their neighbor picked their kids up from the bus and pleaded that they be able to get some of the kids' items from the house so that way they could be taken care of. The officers allowed it, and phone calls were made for my mom to pick up both kids. She eventually got in contact with the son's dad, and he picked him up later that day. So this is where everything comes to light when the officers did a little digging. Apparently, Carl and sister-in-law had been going in people's barns and taking and selling whatever was there. They tried to say that it was all abandoned and that they had a right to take it. When money ran out, they started squatting at this house. Well, apparently, sister-in-law had gotten a friend at work to notarize a document, so that way they could get the deed transferred in their name and the house could actually be theirs. This almost worked if it hadn't been for the fact this house was being fought over by a family that actually owned it. A grandma or someone had died, so the family was fighting over who got the house. In total, there was like 12 charges counted against them in like 3 different counties. So yeah, in the end, Carl got sentenced 20 years and sister-in-law was sentenced 12, even though this was her first offense against the law. It was because she badmouthed the court. The crazy thing is, to this day, she still believes the house is hers and that when she gets out, she will fight to get it back because it is rightfully hers. So, who's got the kids now? The son is with his father and being taught how to be a thug. He came to our house with a switchblade and explained how when robbing someone, you don't go for the face. You go for the arms, shoulders, so that way it's not as obvious. He's completely psycho now, and I'm sad to say he'll probably end up like his mother, in prison. My niece is living with her father now. After she was arrested, my parents got temporary custody of her, so that way, if anything happened, they could handle it while he made plans to come get her. He had to wait a while for the courts to rule he was a fit parent and gave him full custody. He still lives with the girlfriend that lives 3 states away, but my niece is doing very well now. She has some psychological issues due to the abandonment that has happened to her, and what we can only guess went down in that house. But she is in therapy and getting on the right path. I think her future is hopeful, as long as nothing happens to the situation. The girlfriend is very good with her and puts her on a strict schedule and rules, which is ultimately what she needed, a parent. My niece has seen her mother once or twice since being in prison, and her mother still tells her to this day that she'll be out soon, within the next year, she says, and that they'll go back to living in the house after she fights for it. Obviously, this is delusional, and my brother is about ready to cut all ties between them, because this sends my niece in a spiral because she does miss her mom, and this only gives her false hope. She still has 11 more years to serve, and she most definitely isn't getting the house back. My grandma is a wonderful woman and has helped out many of her grandkids over the years. When I was little, one cousin lived with her as my aunt went through a nasty divorce, so that my cousin would have a safe and supportive place to live. Another aunt had her husband leave her and needed to work full-time, so some other cousins stayed with her after school for years until my aunt got off work. My own family lived with my grandparents for a year when my dad lost his job, and I lived with my grandma for a few months with my wife and new daughter after college until I got a real job. Some cousins have misused my grandma's generosity over the years, but she wasn't afraid to stand up at a point and say enough is enough. You've had enough time to get your feet under you and get on your own. One cousin wanted to leave her small town for better opportunities, and Grandma lived on the edge of a large urban area and let my cousin stay with her while searching for a good job. She found part-time work and seemed to enjoy having her own money and helped Grandma around the house, to get to the store, because Grandma didn't like to drive anymore, go to the doctor, fixed a few things around the house, etc. She was really helping, but didn't keep growing, finding more work or getting school or training to make it on her own. Grandma's health has slowly been fading. She is in her 90s after all, and Grandma's children decided that she was going to live with one of them until she needed either more care or passed, and at least one child can be there with her when that happens. To pay for the possible specialty care, they're going to sell Grandma's house. Cousin got pissed. She's been saying things like, "You can't take away my house," and "You're throwing me on the street." Her sisters tried reaching out to her, and turns out she really thought that by fixing the fence and some other things, that the family would be grateful and let her just live in the house forever. The rest of the cousins are thinking, what makes you so special to get a 4-bedroom house all to yourself, and the rest of us get what for an inheritance? Now, I don't expect anything from my grandparents' will. I'm just upset that my cousin thinks she gets the whole house for nothing. My grandparents' will says to sell the house and split the money between the children. I also want to say that my dad and aunts gave her about 4 months' notice that she will need to move, and are happy to let her take anything she needs to make her own house: kitchenwares, a bed, linens, etc. One aunt is even willing to help with the cost of the security deposit. But my cousin isn't packing. Family is now talking about changing the locks while my cousin is at work if she hasn't left by next month. Check eviction laws where you live before changing the locks. Where I live, she has established residency and has tenants' rights, meaning you would have to file with the court to evict her. Considering a lot of places have stayed evictions due to pandemic, this could be difficult. Just changing the locks could result in legal trouble for your family. Good luck. Grandma is still alive, so what her will says is irrelevant. If she has mental capacity, then these decisions are hers to make, and she needs to communicate them to the entitled cousin. If she lacks mental capacity and someone is empowered to act on her behalf by either a power of attorney or has been granted conservatorship, then that person makes the decisions. A discussion with an attorney is necessary to ensure any eviction is properly handled. If you are in the USA, you may be affected by the eviction moratorium currently in effect due to pandemic. At the very least, the attorney could draft a letter demanding rent now that grandma no longer lives in the house. If eviction is not currently possible,